Turn up the sparkle on your next creative session by creating a shaker card. Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley here for Altenew. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am creating 2 sweet themed shaker cards that I think you're going to love. And we're going to use a couple of different product suites today that are brand new for January. First up is the Tasty Treasures product suite. This features a 4x6 stamp set, coordinating dies that are available, as well as a coordinating stencil and mask set. So this allows you to kind of stencil either within the apothecary jars or on the outside. But these 3 products together are a perfect product suite. Next up is the Sugar Rush Stencils and Coordinating Die Set. I'm going to be using this to create some shaker elements for my second card project. This is going to make for a really fun, colorful, and playful design. Now for my first shaker project, I'm going to start by stamping some of these sweet elements from the Tasty Treasures stamp set. I'm going to grab some of the candies and I'm going to position them on my Stamp Wheel 2.0 with some white cardstock. I'm just lining several of the images up at once, and then I'm picking them up using the flip plate. Once I have the images mounted on that flip plate, I'll flip it over, add some black Copic-friendly ink, and then stamp that onto my white cardstock. Now, the cool thing about a stamp wheel is if you don't get enough inking the first time, you can just flip that flip plate over, ink the stamps again, and then press them into the exact same spot, which is exactly what I did here. Now I'm also using my Stamp Wheel 2.0 to stamp this large candy jar onto some clear acetate. So I have my acetate positioned in the stamp wheel onto the sticky grid. It's holding that acetate in place. And then I've positioned my stamped image right in the center and I'm picking it up with the flip plate. Now I'm going to be doing some embossing on this acetate, so I want to make sure that I treat the surface of the acetate with an anti-static powder tool really heavily. And then I'm going to ink up my stamped image using some Altenew embossing ink. This is a clear embossing ink that will hold on to the embossing powder. Once that stamp is inked up, I'm going to flip my flip plate over, press the image onto the acetate, and I like to use sometimes a dry cloth to just help my hand glide over the surface of that flip plate. Now I decided, just for safety's sake, I wanted to re-ink and re-stamp this image so that I get a nice clean, even coating of the embossing powder once I sprinkle it on. You'll see that I've stamped it twice and now I'm picking it up and I will sprinkle on some antique silver embossing powder. Now, this naturally wants to stick to the acetate because there's usually a little bit of static cling on some acetate, but if you've treated it with an anti-static powder tool and you give it a good flick, most of that excess embossing powder is just going to fall away. Now I'm taking my heat tool and you'll notice that I'm kind of heating areas and then moving my heat tool away from it. I'm doing this to avoid warping on this acetate. Now you may still get a little bit of warping, but this is going to help minimize it by just adding the heat in short bursts and not getting too close to the acetate. Now, it will take longer to melt your embossing powder this way, but you're going to end up with less warping and you're going to be happier in the long run. So just take your sweet little time on this. And once I've finished embossing that image, I'm going to wipe away the excess powder tool with a dry cloth. And you can see my heat embossed image there on the acetate. And that looks so wonderful in that silver embossing powder. Now off screen, I used some alcohol markers to color in all of these sweet treats. And now I'm grabbing die coordinating dies and lining those up over those stamped and colored images. Once I have all of those coordinating dies in place, I'll go ahead and complete my die cutting sandwich, run this through my die cutting machine, and then I'll have several images that I can kind of use as supporting images around my main focal shaker element. Now, each of these stamped images is also designed to kind of work inside of the different candy jar options in the Tasty Treasures stamp set. So if you wanted to use them within your shaker window, you could do that as well. Once I have those die cut and set to the side, I'm going to go ahead and grab the coordinating die for the image that I embossed on that acetate, and I'm going to line it up inside a small panel of white cardstock. I'm just kind of centering it up there. Once I have it centered, I'll run this through my die cut machine, and this will create a window on this panel. Once I have my window created, I am going to go ahead and add some double-sided adhesive on the back of this. It's really important that you use a strong adhesive on the back of a shaker window to hold that acetate in place. You don't want your acetate going anywhere because that's what's holding all of your shaker elements inside of the card. And so you want to make sure that you have a nice secure adhesive for the back side of this panel. So you can see I'm just using the Altenew double-sided tape here, and I'm going all around that image. Once I have all of that double-sided adhesive in place, I can remove the backers, and then I'm going to take this panel and I'm going to line it up over that stamped and heat embossed element that's on the acetate. Now at this point, the acetate is larger than I need it to be, and I did this on purpose because I didn't want to try to have to guess at what I needed to trim it down to. In this case, I can just go ahead and position my window over that stamped and embossed image, and then I'll take some scissors and just kind of nestle them right underneath the edge of the cardstock and cut away any of that excess acetate. This will ensure that I'm able to get my image directly into the center of that shaker window that I've created on the panel, and I didn't have to do any guessing on where to line up the stamp or how large to cut my acetate. It just all worked out. So I'm just trimming that all away, and once I have that trimmed down, I'm going to grab a scrap of Volcano Lake cardstock and just kind of hold it on the back side of this panel that I've created and trim it down. That's going to act as my shaker window backer. Now it's time to add some foam adhesive to the back of my shaker window. This is going to create some space for my shaker elements to move around. So I'm taking the Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape and I'm trimming off a large section of this, and then I'm folding that in half. That's going to double up the depth of this foam adhesive and really allow for some extra room for all of these shaker elements within my shaker window. I like to trim off the end where it kind of loops back on itself. I just find it keeps things a little bit tidier. And then I'm going to remove the backer on one side of this doubled up foam adhesive, and I am going to create a well on the back side of this using the foam adhesive. Now, the important thing to remember is that when you're creating a well for your shaker bits, you want to make sure that there's no gaps between your foam adhesive. So I've laid down the two side pieces, and now I'm going to trim this in half so it's a little bit more narrow. And as I place this down, I'm going to butt this foam adhesive up against those two side strips of foam adhesive, closing that area in. I'll do the same thing at the top, and that way, when I place some elements within this shaker window, nothing has the opportunity to leak out, because trust me, there's nothing worse than a leaky shaker card. I did have to trim this down just a bit more because it needed to be narrow enough to go across the top of that jar at the top of the panel. It gets pretty narrow up there, but just using some scissors, I trimmed that down to be a little more narrow. And then once again, just making sure that everything touches and that there's no leaks possible. Now I'm filling my shaker window with some sparkly goodness. You can use whatever you have on hand, whether that's sequins or glitter or even stamped images. You just want to put whatever kind of fancies or floats your boat in there. You can even use a piece of glitter cardstock on the back of this for your backer to add additional sparkle. So I'm just putting some clear sequins into my shaker window, and then I'm removing all the backer from the foam adhesive that I've placed around this window on the back side. Once I get the backers removed, I'm going to take that little panel of Volcano Link cardstock that I trimmed down, and I'm going to place that on the back side of this on that foam adhesive, and that seals in all of my little shaker bits. And you'll see when I flip this over, I have all of those sparkly elements kind of floating around inside that window. And you can see that stamped and heat embossed image on the shaker window, which I think is so much fun. If you wanted to add even more texture to the inside of the shaker window, you could create a stamped pattern on that Volcano Lake backer. That would give additional texture to the shaker window. Now for my sentiment on this card, I have stamped one of the sentiments from the Tasty Treasures stamp set onto some Misty Morning cardstock using some Obsidian pigment ink from Altenew, and then I'm grabbing just a couple of these stamped and colored images and placing them along the left-hand side of this panel. I did use a little bit of foam adhesive for the sentiment and those images, just to kind of give it a little something extra. And now I have this hug sentiment. This is from the new Houseplants layering dies. I'm just die cut the hugs word from some silver cardstock, and I'm placing that onto the shadow layer, which I've die cut from some vellum. I'm just using a little liquid glue to position that. And once that's adhered down, I will add some liquid glue to the back of this and kind of nestle it within the elements that I've created over on the left-hand side. This creates a nice little cluster of a few elements there and really just makes the layout feel complete. Now I decided to keep the rest of this card pretty simple. I have some more Volcano Lake cardstock that's cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and I'm lining one corner up with the 1 3/4 inch mark and the other corner up with the 2 3/4 inch mark. And then I'm trimming that down to give me a nice angle to place on my card front. I'm adding some tape runner adhesive or some sticky tape to the back of this and then positioning it onto a white card base. Now to dress up the seam a little bit, I'm taking some more of that silver cardstock that I die cut that hug sentiment from, and I'm laying it along the seam of that Volcano Lake cardstock and my white card base, and then I will just trim off the excess. Now at this point, I thought it would be fun to add a little bit of texture. I thought I was going to add my shaker window directly to this, but at the last minute, I changed my mind. So I grabbed a few of those Sweet Treat stamps from the Tasty Treasures stamp set, and I'm grabbing just a piece of scrap paper here to cover up the top of my card base. I'm holding that in place with a magnet, and then I'm using this Morning Frost ink to stamp a pattern along that Volcano Lake cardstock at the bottom. So you can see I have all 3 stamps mounted on my stamp block here, and I'm just kind of twisting and turning these to change the direction just a little bit, but I'm filling in that lower Volcano Lake cardstock with a little bit of pattern. Now, of course, this would have been easier if I had done it before I placed it on the card, but I didn't think of that, so I improvised here. Then I positioned my shaker panel onto this card base, and that finishes off my first shaker card featuring that stamped element on the shaker window. I love how this turned out, and I think the stamp pattern on the front of the card just adds so much. Now for card number 2, I'm going to create some stenciled and die cut elements to place within my shaker window. And I have cut down some cardstock to 5 3/4 by 5 3/4. You'll see it's a little bit smaller than my stencil. I planned that so that I could use the sticky grid in my Stamp Wheel 2.0 to hold that stencil in place. Now, if you want to go all the way to the edge with this pattern, it's a good idea to cut your cardstock to 6 by 6, but I wanted to hold that stencil in place using the sticky grid of my Stamp Wheel 2.0, so this is the way I did it. Now I'm using the micro blending brushes from Altenew in order to color in this stencil, because with each stencil layer, there are 4 in this stencil set, I want to do multiple colors on the stencil layers. In order to do this without masking off all of those small images, I'm using those micro blending brushes, and that allows me to really control where I'm putting each color of ink as I lay it down. For instance, on stencil number 1, I wanted the orange slices to be orange, but I wanted the other elements to be either Mountain Mist or Volcano Lake. So this allows me to accomplish that without doing any masking. Now I worked my way through all 4 layers of these stencils, and I'm not going to show you all of it, but I created a really colorful, fun pattern with multiple colors of ink on each stencil layer, and you're gonna see the grand reveal here. Isn't this the most adorable pattern paper that you've ever seen? And I created it myself. Now the cool thing is, for this Sugar Rush stencil set, there's a coordinating die set. So I'm taking this large 1-piece die and I'm lining it up with all of these stenciled images. I'm holding it in place with some satin masking tape from Altenew, and then I'm going to run this through my die cut machine, and it's going to give me some individual images as well as some images that are kind of connected together by little small areas of cardstock. Those can be used either as they are, or you can take a small pair of scissors and trim some of those elements apart so that you can use them as individual pieces. Now for the shaker window backer on this particular card, I'm using the Rainbow Burst stencil set. There is also a coordinating foil plate available for this. I'm just using a couple of the stencils and some pink pearl ink as well as some pink diamond ink to create a soft pattern that I will then trim down to create the backer for my shaker window. Now I created a frame using a couple of rectangle dies that I had in my stash and just die cutting them at the same time. And I die cut that from some silver cardstock, and now I'm flipping that over to the back side. And this time, instead of a double-sided adhesive tape, I am using some liquid glue to hold my acetate on the back side of this frame. Now, liquid glue tends to work really well for a shaker card window, but you have to be careful that you don't slide your acetate across that liquid glue and cause that to kind of squish out onto the window of your shaker card. Now, once again, I have created a double layer of instant dimension foam tape by folding it in half, and I've trimmed it down into really thin strips so that it will be concealed behind that cardstock frame that I've created. Once that foam adhesive is in place, I'm grabbing some of the elements from that Sugar Rush stencil and coordinating die set, and I'm placing them to where they will show face up in my shaker window. And once I have some of those elements in there, I'm going to add some sparkly bits. Keep in mind you could use sequins or glitter or whatever you want inside of your shaker window. Then I'll remove the backer on all of this foam tape and place my stenciled backer onto the back side of this frame, and that creates my little shaker element. Now, I finished off this shaker card by adding a few more of those Sugar Rush elements to that lower right-hand corner of the front side of that shaker window. I did use some foam adhesive for that. And then I stamped another greeting from that Tasty Treasure stamp set onto some Morning Mist cardstock and adhered that in place. Now that other angled piece that I created earlier for my first card, I used the leftovers of that to create my second card. So again, I have this angled piece that I'm placing onto an A2 size card front, and then I'll position my shaker window on top of that, and that finishes off card number 2. A couple of really sweet shaker cards today that feature some fun brand new products from Altenew, including the Tasty Treasures product suite, as well as the Sugar Rush stencil and coordinating die set. I really hope that these 2 cards have inspired you to create a shaker card the next time you get crafty. I think it's such a fun and unexpected way to add a little bit of sparkle and a little bit of shake to your next card making project. Now, as always, I will have links to the featured products used in these projects in the description at YouTube. So if you're looking for something in particular, be sure you check there, or you can head on over to the coordinating blog post. I'll have that linked in the YouTube description below as well. Over there, you're going to find more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. As always, I want to say thank you so much for joining me here. I hope you enjoyed this project, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications here so you don't miss any of the paper crafting and card making video tutorials shared. Thanks again for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.
Hey there, Lydia here. I really do hope that you've just enjoyed the video. If so, please subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, turn on the notification bell so you can get your daily dose of crafty techniques and tutorials just like this. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.